Welcome to another edition of Unstoppable Mindset. If I could talk, I'd be in wonderful shape. Please forgive me. Today we get to meet Vanessa Womack, who is a facilitator in leadership, governance, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a lot of other kinds of things. And I don't want to give it all away because she's going to be able to tell her story much better than I do. Isn't that usually the way of it? Vanessa, thanks very much for being here and welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Well, thanks, Michael, for this opportunity to be here. I know we tried this once, but, technical glitches happen, so we're doing it again. Good to see you.
Well, it's good to see you. And yeah, technology happens, and so we do what we do, but glad we're here. So lots to get to, of course, but I'd like to start as usual. Tell me a little bit about you growing up and kind of where you came from and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, well, let's see now. I grew up in the Commonwealth of Virginia in a small city called Danville, Virginia, where I grew up in a household. If you look at the placement, I am the middle girl of three, and I have a brother. So household with mom and dad, pretty typical, not a poor neighborhood, but we had such great values, Christian values, and we were very active in the community. Finished high school there, and then started my first year at HBCU, Tennessee State University. But I became, not bored, but adventurous and moved to New York City to finish my education at CUNY, City University of New York, Baruch College, and began my career mostly in corporate New York. My first job in New York was at McGraw Hill Publishing Company. And after that, I had many other jobs. If you want to ask me about those, pretty adventuresome.
You have been involved in a lot of different things, needless to say. Well, so you said you started with McGraw Hill. What did you do there?
I was in the classified, not to give my age away, but yes, I am
We talked about this before.
Yes, we did. I am a boomer. But I started in classified advertising in the early mid-70s, where I did the clippings for some of the magazines like Chemical Engineering, Business Week, and did that for a couple of years and then promoted to public affairs, where I actually was the editor of the McGraw Hill directory, the worldwide directory, putting that together, and even had opportunities to conduct tours in Rockefeller Center. When I was in public affairs, I would do tours for groups that would come in to visit McGraw Hill and the surrounding buildings, take them through the tunnels at Radio City Music Hall.
Yes.
And one of the groups I remember, either educators or students or even some foreign visitors. There was even a group, I hate to say that, no, I'm not going to hate to say it, but from Russia. So it was exciting to do that. And after that, I was at Saks Fifth Avenue. I even worked at the NFL and Warner Publisher Services.
So where you were in New York, did you ever eat at Hurley's Saloon?
Yes, I think we had talked about that.
We did,
yes. I think I had a drink there. I didn't really.
I'll never forget one of the stories that I heard about Hurley's. The Hurley brothers leased the building in the 1890s, and they had a 100-year lease. And then when Rockefeller Center was being built, they wanted to buy out Hurley's, and Hurley's didn't want to sell. And that's why there's this little 4-story building on one corner of all of that. But all of the reporters, like the NBC reporters who worked and dealt through Rockefeller Center and NBC, would go down there, and somehow they connected a phone line and a phone from the newsrooms to a phone behind the bar at Hurley's. And so they could be down at the bar, and anytime a call came in, then somebody would get the reporters or whatever, and they'd get the calls and go do what they needed to do, but they could spend their time at Hurley's. People are creative.
Yes, we are.
Well, and we talked about, of course, talking about classifieds. I mentioned Condé Nast, and again, another one where it was all about classifieds. And whether it's called classifieds or something else, the fact is that people are still selling advertising today.
Oh, yes. That's why I say I'm pretty old school. I remember there were those old-fashioned fax machines where we would communicate between the McGraw Hill offices, for instance, between New York and Philadelphia. So, but, we've come a long way in technology.
Yeah, and now we also have this thing about audiobooks, which, of course, I'm very prejudiced about and like, and I'm glad that most of the major publishers are doing a lot more with that. And it's all electronic, so it's a lot easier to create and not store so much stuff, because it's now all audio oriented, or even print books are oftentimes electronically oriented as well as print. But I think that there's, rightly so, a group of people, and it's still a very large group, that likes to hold a book in their hand and read print. And there's a lot of value to that. No matter what someone says, a Kindle isn't quite the same as a book.
That's true. But it's fortunate that we have those options.
Yeah. Well, and being blind, a Braille device that can have a non-permanent or refreshable Braille display, and you can put a book file on it, is still not the same as reading it with paper. But either way, reading is reading, and it's still a wonderful thing that we all get to be able to do.
And I've enjoyed reading ever since I was a young child in elementary school. In fact, one of my, I guess, what do you call nicknames, was a bookworm.
That's pretty cool.
Yes, because I always I enjoyed getting lost in the novels and the books I was reading.
Yeah, and I still do today. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, I wanted to be a court stenographer because of the business classes I had in high school. I wanted to be a court stenographer, but at one point I also wanted to be an FBI agent. However, I was told either by the teachers that I was not the right color, or I was also a little girl or female, that I would not be accepted in something like an FBI. So my mother encouraged me to go into business. And I took shorthand, all the required business courses in high school, and I took shorthand. And I thought, wow, court stenographer would be cool. But then my mom said, no, you need to go to college. So I did continue to take shorthand or practice it for a little while. And I thought it was pretty cool. But I went to Tennessee State University for my freshman year and started my curriculum into business management, or a bachelor's in business administration.
Who influenced you most, do you think, while you were growing up and so on? Would it be your mom, or is there another person who stood out even more?
I think my mom, of course, my dad too, but my mom was pretty straightforward, very conscientious about her children being better educated and succeeding in life. So she encouraged all of us. And I was very much influenced by her to continue my education. I mean, I was smart, but I didn't know some things came better to me, like writing, which I enjoyed doing. And I enjoyed writing, and I still do. And I wish I had embarked on writing stories earlier in life. So, but yes, my mother was a great influencer. And I'm also from a family of faith. So I always have to give my God all the glory and thank him for bringing us all so far.
Yep. That's, of course, extremely important to do, and makes not only a lot of sense, but the reality is God is with us and in us and all around us. And more of us ought to recognize that. But, what can you do? That's an individual choice.
Yes, and it's very sustaining, and it gives me and so many who are faithful hope, especially in these such troubling times.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. My wife passed away in November, and
I'm so sorry to hear that, because I remember she was there before when we tried this. Yes, sorry for your loss.
Well, her body was just not keeping up as 2022 went along. And as I tell people, the body doesn't always keep up with the spirit. But the other side of it is she's still around here. Mm-hmm. And I know if I misbehave, I'm going to hear about it. So, you got to keep on the straight and narrow somehow, which is fine.
And it's important to keep those who have left this earth, the ones we've loved, near and dear to us, because they are and will always be a part of us.
Well, and as I tell people, you don't move on from 40 years of marriage, but you move forward.
That's right.
I think the difference is if you talk about moving on, then you're going to leave it behind and forget it. And that is something that I will not allow myself to ever do and shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I agree.
So what was growing up like in the South for you in terms of how did that affect or have any influence on what you've done and what you do with your life? Was the South an influence for you?
Well, I had no choice to grow up where I was.
Yeah,
so
of course.
It was a good childhood. It was full of some interesting things, like being outside now is, I don't know if children get out and play like we did growing up. It was so free-willing, and we could explore neighborhoods. We could go into the woods and pick blackberries, bring them home, and Mom would make blackberry cobbler. I went to an elementary, middle, and high schools that were very, they welcome, especially in elementary, was segregated, a segregated school, but the teachers and the administration were so nurturing. And then in middle school, or what we called back then junior high.
Yes.
Yes.
We remember that.
Old school.
Not at all.
Oh, yes. I still have a young mind. But back then it was at the beginning of the integration. And I walked to school. I mean, we had maybe one school bus. It wasn't consistent throughout the school year, but I walked to school. Like all my other classmates from my segregated neighborhood. And, I was a good student. There were some challenges. I remember when Martin Luther King died, and a white classmate had some very awful things to say. And that resonated with me. And it's like, this is not right. But this is how it is. And that was the awful thing about it, is like, that was just the world we grew up in. In high school, I excelled and became very active with some of the student groups even with the marching band. Didn't play an instrument. I was one of the, I guess you call them majorettes. But I was very active, and my friends were Black and white and Asian. So one becomes, you live in that world, and you say, this is who I am in this world, but how can I be effective? How can I make change? And making change meant to make friends and to understand them and have them understand me. But it was a good time, yet it was transformative. I mean, in such a way that it prepares me or prepares us for what we have to deal with, or what we're still dealing with when it comes to I guess, diversity and being inclusive and accepting one another. When someone asks, and I think you would ask me, what makes me qualified to be a DEIA consultant? It's like, I live the life. It's the skin I live in. It's the world in which we live in, and having a voice to affect change. It's so critical.
Well, it is. And I love so many things about what you've just been saying. I am always amazed at my own experiences, and they really coincide with yours. Somebody made some comment when we were much younger, and it stuck with us and sticks with us, or somebody observed something, or we were taught something. And how, especially as younger people, when we're searching and we hear something that really sticks with us, we don't forget it. And it's unfortunate that somebody said something extremely negative about Martin Luther King, but at the same time, I think history has demonstrated the kind of person he was and the character that he had. But it is very true that history is as history is. And I think it's so important we don't forget that. You know, I collect old radio shows as a hobby, and I'm fascinated by the people who want to, for example, ban Amos and Andy from radio collections. And they want to ban one thing or another, and they say, well, that's not who we are. It is what we were. And there are other parts about it. Like I wrote one of the authorities on Amos and Andy once, email, because when I was growing up, I actually first listened to Amos and Andy on television. I had absolutely no idea that they were Black. And one day, Amos and Andy was no longer around on TV. And it was years later that I found out that they were taken off the air because people didn't like the depiction of Black people that Amos and Andy represented. And while I appreciated that and understand it, it is still what we were at the time. But then when I learned about that and I went back and listened to old radio shows, mostly I didn't hear overt references to being Black. Oh, yes, there were the accents and so on, but I never heard the really overt references. So I emailed this authority and I said, so I don't hear a lot of references to Amos and Andy on the radio being Black. And she wrote back and she said, well, when the show first started and they came to New York, one of the first questions they asked is, where do the dark people live? And she said there were some references, but by 1937, references to color had completely gone away. And the reality is it was a show that everyone listened to and loved because of the quality of the humor. It had nothing to do really with race, unless you allowed it to be. And so we really need to keep our history because it teaches us so much.
And I couldn't agree with you more, because it is knowing that history, which is critical for us now. If you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. But I listened to Amos, I listened to that show on the radio when I was little. And it fascinated me to know that there were people of color, Negroes, who were actually acting. And I thought that was very significant as a very young child to hear that. And then to see, as I was growing up in the 60s, we had, black and white television, but to see some of those shows like Julia and some Black actors who were on some of the sitcoms, and also like Maddox. Oh gosh,
Yes. Yeah.
To see actors get involved, it was very important. And then to know how far we've come now, because we, as a Black and brown people, we've advanced so much, and we want to. We're so capable. We have done so much, and we have been influenced, and we've been encouraged to do even more now, which is exciting.
One of my favorite TV shows growing up was Room 222. Do you remember that one?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Never any reference to race on that show. And it was a show, again, that provided good entertainment. If you chose to focus on skin color, then you did. But the reality is that wasn't really anything that was referenced in the show at all.
Yeah, the focus was on teachers, students, and relating to each other, helping each other. That should and always should be the focus. And so anyway, it's disheartening now to read about books being banned, or talking about wokeness, which is just, I don't want to say silly, but it is ridiculous. That
pathetic.
You take a word like that and you just make it sound so horrible. If you're not woke, then you must be asleep. You need to know what's going on in the world. You need to be aware. And that's really what it's all about, being aware of how society has disenfranchised so many people to the point where the racism and discrimination continues. And we should be well beyond that as a society, as a country, and not to go backwards, but to go forward and to embrace and each other as who we are. Anyway, I'm trying not to get on my soapbox.
No, it's okay. And we should. One of my favorite books, and I think we've talked about it before, is To Kill a Mockingbird, of course, which really is as dramatic a demonstration of how people were treated simply because of skin color, and the explorations of Scout and learning about it. And of course, her father, and then the movie, Gregory Peck, who did such a powerful job of dealing with that. How anyone could consider banning that book, it makes me think that most of the people who want to do that are listening to someone and have never read the book, and certainly have never processed it.
Yes, and I think those folks who are, I think, are living in fear, are just afraid, and afraid to knowing the truth.
Yeah, and that fear manifests itself in so many ways. And it is true that there's a lot of fear, and there are so many people who still get away with things. And hopefully one of these days we can see reality kick in, and that the whole issue be addressed. And it isn't just race. One of the things about Unstoppable Mindset as a podcast, as the tagline says, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. I word it that way because diversity has decided not to include disabilities in any way. Whereas inclusion, either you are going to truly be inclusive or you're not inclusive. And you can't be inclusive if you don't include disabilities. Well, we're partially inclusive. We're not prejudiced against race, but disabilities you can't leave out if you're going to be inclusive. And so it is a different animal, and it's why I emphasize inclusion first. And the other part about it is, societally speaking, technically speaking, and realistically speaking, everyone has a disability. And we've talked about it some on Unstoppable Mindset. One of the disabilities for most people is you're light dependent. You don't do well if there isn't a light on. And Thomas Edison, in creating the light switch, has invented a way for you to cover up the disability, but make no mistake, it's there. And in reality, we all have challenges. I was at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel around the time of the Oscars, and I checked in, and my niece, nephew, and I were there, and we dropped our luggage off in a room, and then we went downstairs, and all of a sudden people started screaming, and I said, "What's going on?" It turns out we had a power failure, not only in the hotel, but in the blocks around it. And of course, some of us said it was all Jimmy Kimmel's fault because he's the host of the Oscars. This was the day before the Oscars. But the reality is, people didn't know what to do with the lights off. And just so many people had such a challenge. Didn't bother me a bit. We all have challenges, and we should recognize that just because some challenges and some people's challenges are different than ours doesn't make them less than us.
And I agree. And sometimes, for instance, we become so accustomed to things that, or the way we live, or we just don't understand how not having a disability or light, or being able to maneuver out of a walk without the assistance of crutches or a wheelchair. We need to understand that this is not something that people can not live with. We have to. And we have to embrace those who may not be able to do the same things you or I could do. And that needs to be in that word inclusive. That needs to be recognized with organizations who say that, yes, we are inclusive. But then you may ask, do you provide accessibility on your website? Do you provide accessibility in your stairways, in your office environments? And it doesn't always, of course, have to be a physical disability. It could be autism. It could be some other
neurodiversity.
Yes. And you don't visibly see that. So some people will just make assumptions that, oh, you're okay. There's nothing wrong with you.
And then, of course, we have the most significant group of people with disabilities at all, and that's politicians. But their disability is self-imposed. Oh, they're fun to pick on, though.
Yeah, pick on them anytime you want.
Yeah. But I'm an equal opportunity abuser. You notice I'm not.
Yes, I say that to my students. I'm an equal opportunity picker-oner.
Many of them were born ignorant, and they've been losing ground ever since, as Fred Allen, the old radio comedian, used to say. But that's true of a lot of people these days. But you know what? It is. What do you do? Have you had any real significant events that stand out in your life that have changed you or really have affected you?
And I always say, besides becoming a mother,
that'll do it.
That definitely. There was an opportunity, and I had an opportunity, and I was a bone marrow donor and saved the life of a little girl. It's been over 30 years ago. And Katrina is her name, or was her name. She had been diagnosed with leukemia. And the National Marrow Donor Program, at the time now it's called Be the Match.
Yeah.
Had numerous campaigns, bone marrow recruitment campaigns in the Washington, D.C. area, particularly focused on a teenager who a Black teenager, little girl, well, young woman, who needed a bone marrow transplant, and no one in her family matched. And it became a national campaign to save Joanne. So many people came out from churches, community groups, businesses to just give a tube of blood or to get in the registry. And all of that happened during a time where I had just been married for, I don't even know if I was married. We were married a few years, and trying to have a baby. But I submitted a blood sample for just to go in the registry, and lo and behold, a month or two later, I was called as a preliminary match for another child somewhere in the United States. Went through all the required follow-up tests and became the match for Katrina. And that was in 1991. And during the time that I was being prepped for the bone marrow extraction, Katrina was at the time, I didn't know, but she was on the other side of the country in Washington, Seattle, Washington, being prepped, removing all of her diseased bone marrow. And I was being prepped to have my bone marrow harvested. And during the time that they were doing tests in the hospital, I guess I have to give it away. It was in Reader's Digest, a story in Reader's Digest. One of the blood tests for me came back that I was pregnant.
There you go.
And when I was, and they said, you can't donate marrow because the test says you're positive for pregnancy. And I said, I am not pregnant. And they said, you have to decide. I mean, I couldn't stop the process because Katrina was already at death's door. So anyway, I said, I am not changing my mind. I'm going to do this. And you can test me again tomorrow morning before the harvest starts. And they tested again. It was negative. So that whole experience of becoming a bone marrow donor and then having the fear, well, I wasn't fearful. I knew I wasn't pregnant, to go through with it, regardless of that test result, to save Katrina's life. And that's what happened. She survived almost 19 years after that donation. And miracle of all miracles, she had a little girl, which according to medical statistics, once you are go through a bone marrow transplant, you lose the ability for fertilization, having children. But she did. She had a miracle baby. That changed my life.
Why is it that being pregnant is a problem? Do you know?
Well, the actual harvesting, I think, of the marrow at the time, and this was the not through a stem cells, but it was through the iliac crest, the lower back. I think harvesting the bone marrow may have impacted the fetus, if there had been. So I don't know how, but they said it would be dangerous, and they would not or could not do it if I was pregnant. But I really knew I was not pregnant.
But I gather you're saying that today it's different, and
well, today they're
doing stem cells and so on.
Yes,
it's a different
yes,
process.
I think it would be different today. The process advanced since that time, and I actually was a poster child for the bone marrow program.
Well, and you had children since then?
Yes, I did.
There you go.
Yes, and they are adult children, wonderful, wonderful children, one of each.
And they are probably, as Mark Twain would say, so surprised at how much you've learned as they grew up.
And then they might say you probably didn't learn enough.
It's possible too.
Yes, but yeah, too. They're wonderful adult kids.
That is really great that you have been able to go through that experience, and obviously it sticks with you. And it certainly takes courage to be a bone marrow, transfer person.
Well, it did. And that was something that happened well over 30 years ago. But I also had I want to say probably a more recent or relevant experience. And that relates to my current career as a LinkedIn learning instructor when I did the course Managing a Diverse Team. And to me, that was a professional or career highlight.
Tell us about that, if you would, please.
Sure. The course is Managing a Diverse Team, and it is on the LinkedIn Learning platform. It was recorded back in 2017 and released in 2018. Now it is along with English, in 9 languages, which is kind of exciting to see so many global learners who respond that they've taken the course on the LinkedIn platform. And as you can imagine, managing a diverse team, it talks about how, team management and being inclusive in embracing the team members, giving them opportunities to become voices, functional team members, and how to deal with conflict too, and how to deal with some perceived disagreements that might be discriminatory or racist, and how do you work with people who might have different opinions. But I think there's some lessons learned in the course that gives the learners, the audience, some good information on how to deal with certain situations on the team, how to embrace diversity, how to celebrate diversity, and how to deal with culture in the organization. So it's called Managing a Diverse Team, and it's been on the platform now for almost 5 years.
So what is your career today, and where do you work, or do you focus mainly on the LinkedIn course, or what?
Oh, no, that's it's great that people do still take the course, but professionally, I navigate in the space of leadership and DEIA. On the leadership side, I do facilitation and consulting for boards of directors in that space, roles and responsibilities, helping them understand what that is and how to work strategically with each other, and in the governance area. And then with DEIA, I have been operating or doing consulting work in an exciting industry that is growing and developing in this region of Virginia, the Richmond, Petersburg region, which is the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. And there are a cluster of businesses and educational institutions and biotech and biosciences organizations that are building that pharma industry here to make medicines more affordable and to have that production in the United States as opposed to outside the United States.
So you have your own company, or do you work for another company, or how
Now,
does that work?
I have a small independent, I call myself a solopreneur.
There you go.
However, over the last 2-3 years, I keep telling myself I need to hire someone. Indeed, I do. Not to put a pun or spin on that, but
I get it. Indeed, you do.
Indeed, I do. To grow this solopreneur into more of a bona fide small business by hiring at least a part-time person to help grow the business. And that is something I will be focusing on in the next several months to the next couple of years, just growing that part of the business to expand the services of whether it's the governance piece or the diversity piece beyond the pharma manufacturing industry. And in the pharma manufacturing industry, the cluster that's growing here in the Richmond-Petersburg area, it is very important to be inclusive in how we grow that industry, to include communities of color, Black and brown communities that have been traditionally underrepresented in business growth and development. And that is going to be very important to provide that these companies that are here and those that come here, we hope to grow the region by bringing in more companies, that those companies would be diverse in their vendors and create jobs that help these communities for employment and to become more trained, to build pathways into the jobs that would come out of the growth of the pharma manufacturing industry here.
How did you get involved in doing pharma kinds of things specifically?
Well, let's be clear. I'm not in the manufacturing plant.
Right.
However,
but how did you get involved with them as clients specifically? I'm just curious.
Well, I'll tell you, it was. I have to say, it was a godsend. After I was separated from my full-time job in 2021, I think timing is everything.
Yeah.
It was time for me to start to look at growing my small gig consulting solopreneur business. So I was putting out resumes, responding to opportunities to bring in more income, and was approached or actually selected by this company called Activation Capital. And I am very grateful for them because the president and CEO of that organization said, interviewed me and follow-up interview and offered me the consulting contract for the DEIA portion to grow that industry in this area. So it's basically a startup with the Alliance for Building Better Medicine to make medicine more affordable and to make medicine here in the United States.
And you've been doing it ever since.
Yes, it's been about a little over a year, about a year that I've been doing the consulting work. And I do have, I've had other clients, particularly in the governance world, where I have almost for a year have done some board, we called huddles with a group in Kentucky. So it's nice to have out-of-state clients, and that worked out really well, and hope to continue to grow in that aspect too.
Are you going to over time update the LinkedIn course, or do you think it will need it, or is it pretty evergreen the way it is?
It's pretty evergreen. And I say that because LinkedIn, they own the course, and they recently updated it. And as I had mentioned, it's in different languages. So they have translated into so many languages: Spanish, German, Polish, Italian.
And you've had to learn all those languages to write them, right?
Oh my gosh.
Well, that is really cool, though, that it's appeared in so many languages. Well, I know that you also are an author. Tell me about that.
Oh my gosh, yes. Let's see. My first book, my first novel, I should say, is a combination romance novel and what do you call it? Growing up.
Mm-hmm.
So one who is about a young woman who left home, southern state, to move to New York and really try to find her career.
Sounds like somebody we've been talking about.
Yes, well, I did use a lot of my imagination, which made the whole process of writing so exciting.
Literary license.
Yes. And that first book is called Paint the Sky Purple. Paint the Sky Purple. And I had a writing coach at the time, and she said, Vanessa, you're my first writing author, client at the time. And I wrote the book in 7 months. She said, I can't believe you did this in 7 months. That was only because I had a little more time and I was excited. And every weekend I would keep writing. Anyway, that was my first novel. And I'm still trying to write that second one. But I did publish 2 children's books on STEM. The first one is Emerald Jones, the fashion designer diva. And Emerald Jones, the children's books are for grades 3 through 5 or ages 8 to 12 to encourage students and teachers to really promote STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and STEAM, art in the classroom. Emerald Jones is about a little girl who wanted to become a fashion designer, but she wanted to quit school. However, she was very good in math, and she was encouraged by her principal and teachers not to think about quitting school, but to advance her math skills, and she did. The other one is Bookie and Little Ray in the game. And Bookie and Little Ray are rivals in school. However, they find that they have something in common. They both like designing games or wanted to be, computer game designers. So there's the technology, the engineering, and the math skills that require that. So they bonded after some rivalry and became, well, at the end of the book, they become partners in a successful gaming business.
Cool. What's your next book project going to be then?
Well, I have been toying around with the idea, with a couple of different ideas. I have one that has been sitting in the computer for the last several years about two friends who have been friends since early high school, and they have a disagreement. But they come back together in their adult years doing a very chaotic disaster, so to speak, where one is trapped in a building and the other one's nearby to help her. And then they go on an adventure, and not to give away most of the plot.
Don't do that.
They're on an adventure to save not only family members, but save a company from really poisoning its clients, and it had to do with a medical procedure or a invention that goes wrong. Anyway.
Well, you'll have to let us know when it comes out so that we can definitely put it up on Unstoppable Mindset. So what's next for you? What are your plans going forward?
Well, I am working on it, as I said, to grow Vanessa Womack Consulting LLC. That is really what I need to do to, as we say in the business, scale up. And there's another, I guess I can call it a startup called Broaden Your Board that would match board of directors with people of color or diverse, to be more inclusive, to bring diverse candidates that would be a good fit for their board. To be I guess a match, bring the matches to them.
Well, I hope as you go forward, maybe in addition to color and so on, you can think about disabilities and so on as being an option of different people
absolutely.
To add to boards.
Absolutely. And when we want to be inclusive, all that would be part of the opportunity to find candidates that would be a good fit for these boards.
Well, that definitely is a cool thing, and it sounds exciting, and I'm anxious to hear more about it as it grows, as well as when that new book comes out. Let us know, and we'll have to have you back on Unstoppable Mindset, talk about all that as we go forward. But it is definitely exciting, and I'm really glad that we were able to spend the time and redo this. And I know you have to leave pretty soon, so we'll go ahead and thank you for being here and for all the things that you had to say. Any kind of last words of wisdom you want to tell to people before we end this?
Well, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to be on the broadcast. And for those who have been or those who will be, it's a nice conversation to have, to talk about the things that are, life-changing or important things in life, to be encouraging, to have the opportunity to share different ideas. It is so important to have that connection. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And when the book does come out, I'll let you know. You should. That will be great. How do people reach out to you if they want to maybe engage your services or learn more about what you do? Well, there's my website, vanessawomack.com. Very easy to remember. Can you spell, please? VANESSAWOMACK.com. There's also the LinkedIn. You can always reach out to me at LinkedIn. You can find me at Vanessa Womack on LinkedIn, or look for the course Managing a Diverse Team. I also want to put a plug there that right now it's free. So if you want to take Managing a Diverse Team, it's free for just a little bit longer. I can't say how much longer, but you can go on and search for it and take it. Well, thank you very much for being here with us and for all the interesting things and the fun things that we've had a chance to talk about. And definitely you got to come back on again when you've got book and other things all set to talk about. We would love to have you be back on here with us again. And I want to thank you for listening to us. You can reach out to Vanessa. We would love that. And you can certainly reach out to me. I want to know what you think about our podcast today. Please email me at Michael,
HIMICHAELHI at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com. Or you can visit www.michaelhingson.com and click on podcasts and go there and listen to more episodes of Unstoppable Mindset, or you can find them wherever you find any kind of podcast. So iTunes and Spotify and iHeart and all those other kinds of places. We really appreciate you taking the time, and we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your thoughts, your comments on this or any of our podcasts. And of course, if you know anyone, and Vanessa, you as well, if you know anyone who might be a good guest to come on Unstoppable Mindset, please let us know. Love to hear from you about that. And once more, Vanessa, thanks very much for being here with us today, and let's do it again soon.
Okay, very good. You take care. And everybody else, please take care out there.
And there you go.